Southeast, where we could see some more prolonged rain turning up during the evening and the first part of the night. Otherwise, quite a few showers continuing, particularly western areas, and then increasingly those showers moving up through Wales into Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Away from the showers, some clear spells, temperatures dipping into the single figures, so a cool-ish start to the day on Thursday. But some sunshine around, particularly towards the south first thing, whilst cloud and rain moves up through Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. And then once again showers break out fairly widely, a mixture of sunny spells and showers, those showers slow moving, possibility of hail and thunder in places, with the central and southern part of England most likely affected by those heaviest downpours. But where we get some sunshine, particularly towards the southeast, 22 Celsius, high teens elsewhere. Showers continue for a time on Thursday evening, and really it's a showery picture on Friday as well, with some sunshine in between. But the showers fade away eventually through the weekend, and next week looks drier. Bye-bye.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to PMQs Live with me, Gloria De Piero. It's the battle of the deputies today as Dominic Raab takes the place of the Prime Minister, who's at the NATO summit in Madrid. He'll be met by Labour's Angela Rayner. That will all kick off in just a few minutes. But first, I'm joined in the studio by a fantastic panel of MPs today. It is the Conservative Alex Shelbrooke, who will be appearing any second now, I'm assured, and Labour's Ellie Reeves. And of course, we'd love to hear what you make of today's session. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. So we can meet the first member of the panel today as Alec makes his way in. Ellie Reeves, Shadow Justice Minister and Labour MP for Lewisham West and Penge. Ellie, good to see you.
Thank you.
So it's the battle of the deputies today. If you had a question, what would you ask?
Well, if I had a question today, I would be asking the Deputy Prime Minister about women's rights. Last week, women across the globe were really shocked to see the US Supreme Court reverse the decision in Wade and Roe, effectively making abortion illegal in the US. And I'd be asking the Deputy Prime Minister his take on that, given in 2019, he voted against extending abortion rights to women in Northern Ireland. But I'd also want to ask him about his Bill of Rights, which will make it harder for victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault to get justice because it would remove the positive obligation on the police to investigate those sorts of crimes.
They are doing stuff on rape, aren't they, the government? They are trying to, because there's lamentable rape prosecution rates. And to be fair to Dominic Raab, who's not here to defend himself, and Alex not here yet to defend him either, he did announce ways to speed up rape prosecutions last week.
Well, rape prosecutions is a shocking something like 1.6% of the number of rapes that are reported to police result in a charge. 1.6%. It's absolutely shocking figure. And over 3 years ago, the government said we're going to do a review into why rape prosecutions are so long. It took the government 2 years to publish that review, and in it they apologised for their failings. We're over a year on from that review, and we've seen very little change. And you're right, the Deputy Prime Minister has made some announcements, but it's piecemeal and it's not enough. So, for example, one of the things he said is that 3 courts in the country will be specialist rape courts. Well, why only 3? A report that came out just a couple of months ago said that this should be the priority of the government. There should be specialist rape courts up and down the country, and we're seeing nothing like that, in contrast to Labour's position.
And I suspect they might say, well, if you want to talk about women's rights, at least we've had women leaders. It's more than the Labour Party have ever managed. It's a fair cop, isn't it? It's a bit embarrassing.
Well, we're going to see our fantastic deputy leader today at PMQs, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Alec, lovely to see you.
Hello.
Alex Shelbrooke, the MP for Elmet and Rothwell, my part of the world. What would you ask if you had a Prime Minister's question today?
I think I'd almost certainly be focusing on the war in Ukraine. I think that, I'll say I don't think the government's putting across the importance of why we're involved as well as it could. Right. I think that if I was there, I'd be emphasising the point that this is our war. It's a war on us. So much of our food and energy supplies come through Ukraine and come to us. And, we've heard the phrase about fatigue, war fatigue, that it goes off the news, etc. And it seems to be a war and a long way away, but actually it's our doorstep. And I think that I would be asking about what further measures is my right honourable friend taking to try and ensure food supplies can get out of Ukraine, and what conversations are you having with counterparts in Europe as to see what we can do to get that grain out of Odessa. I think that really, I don't think we're making the point strong enough at the moment, just what the impact that's having on our country.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the figures that we're going to see today, because it's not Boris versus Keir as normal. It is Dominic versus Angela. Alec, I'll stay with you because Sally had a little bit longer time. How might it be a different performance today? What do you like about Angela Rayner? I'll put you on the spot, and I'll ask Ellie what she likes about Dominic Raab.
It's almost the flip, isn't it, really, is that Boris is quite bombastic and Angela's bombastic, and they're up against normally sort of the opposite sort of character to that. So I think, on a personal level, I like Angela, and I think that she... I like the way she punches, and I think that, Prime Minister's questions, it's a bit of entertainment for people as much as anything else, and I like a bit of punch.
Right, Ellie, the challenge to you. You have to say something nice about Dominic Raab.
Well, I'm often up against Dominic Raab in the chamber as a shadow justice minister. So I'm sort of used to responding to statements and questions in the chamber against him. He's a very different personality from Boris. He doesn't have that same, dare I say, waffle that we see from the Prime Minister most weeks. So it will be interesting to see what happens today.
And Angela, she gave a recent interview saying she has a lot of welly, as I think Alec referred to. But she made the point that she'd like to see Keir have a bit more welly. Does welly work in the chamber?
Well, I think that Angela and Keir both do a brilliant job in the chamber, but they do have different styles and different approaches. And, I'm looking forward to seeing Angela today and taking on Dominic Raab. She's fantastic in the chamber, and I think, Angela's background makes her such a strong politician. And I don't think that the that the Tories really like being up against her. They don't always know sort of what to do when she sort of asks these brilliant questions. I think we're a bit intimidated by her, to be honest, and I think that's great.
Not as intimidated as Keir is when she's performing. But I think it's always the difference, isn't there, between the politicians and the lawyers. And
right.
Keir and Dominic are lawyers.
Yes.
And Boris and Angela are politicians.
Oh, go on. What's your favourite type?
Oh, definitely the politician. I love it.
Definitely say that, Alec, given I was a lawyer for 12 years before coming into Parliament.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely love the political, you know. Look, Churchill deliberately had the chamber made smaller when it was rebuilt because he wanted the gladiatorial feel to it. And I think that for all of the some people say about, oh, I don't like it like that and everything else, it's the tradition of our politics. And I think you could admit, Ellie, that the chamber is a very different place to a courtroom.
It certainly is, but also sometimes at PMQs...
Ellie, we're going to come back. We're going to go to the chamber. It's Prime Minister's questions.
The British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with questions to Prime Minister. I start with Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. He attended the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, the G7 Leaders Summit, and today he's at the NATO Summit in Madrid. Mr. Speaker, I know that the thoughts of the whole House will be with the family and friends of Dame Deborah James following the news of her death. I lost my father at a young age to cancer. I will know firsthand the pain that her family must be feeling. But we also know that Dame Deborah was a huge inspiration to so many and raised millions to help others affected by cancer.
Andrew Jones.
Nationally, 52% of disabled people are in work, compared with 81% for non-disabled people. Disability Action Yorkshire, which is a charity based in Harrogate, works to close that gap, and they have highlighted the success of the Access to Work scheme. For example, one young person, having been told he would never work, is now, thanks to the targeted support available, a trainee brewer at Roosters Brewery. Yeah. So will my right honourable friend consider how we can boost awareness amongst employers of this Access to Work scheme, and also consider how we can simplify the application process so more disabled people don't get deterred and will embrace it?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising the work of Disability Action Yorkshire? They're doing terrific work in his constituency. I can reassure him that the DWP is committed to improving awareness through campaigns and partnerships with employers, but also disability organisations. They're also working specifically on a digital service which will make it more accessible and more visible.
Deputy Leader Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also share with the Deputy Prime Minister his deepest condolences and his personal experience as we mourn the loss of Dame Deborah James, who fearlessly campaigned to inspire so many, and I'm absolutely sure there's no doubt that she saved the lives of many more. And to the family of Zara Alina, who was tragically murdered this week on the streets of Ilford. Well, Mr. Speaker, I also want to congratulate the two honourable members, the new members, who won in the by-elections this week, including my honourable friend, the member for Wakefield. Mr. Speaker, this week the government lost 2 by-elections in one day, the first in 3 decades. It's no wonder that the Prime Minister has fled the country and left the honourable member to carry the can. The people of Wakefield and Tiverton held their own vote of no confidence. The Prime Minister isn't just losing the room, Mr. Speaker, he's losing the country. But instead of showing some humility, he intends to limp on until the 2030s. So does he think the Cabinet will prop him up for this long?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable lady. I gently point out to her that we want this Prime Minister to go on a lot longer than she wants the leader of the Labour Party to go on. Mr. Speaker, we've got a working majority of 75. We're focusing on delivering for the British people. Record low unemployment. Wouldn't have happened if we'd listened to the Labour Party. More policing, tougher sentencing in force this week. Police, Courts, Crime and Sentencing Act. She voted against both, so did the Labour Party. And we'll protect the public from these damaging rail strikes when we've got the scene of Labour front benchers joining the picket lines.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. But the truth is, what I want for my honourable friend, the Leader of this opposition, is not to be the Leader of the opposition, but to be the Prime Minister of this country. And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, it couldn't come quick enough. Britain can't stomach this Prime Minister for another 8 years. His own backbenchers can't stomach him for another 8 minutes. And if they continue to prop him up, Mr. Speaker, I doubt the voters will stomach him for even 8 seconds in the ballot box. Now let's imagine, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is still clinging on into the 2030s. Under this tax-high, low-growth Tory government, at this rate, by 2030, the British public will have endured 55 tax rises. Yep. So how many more tax rises will this government inflict on working families before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she was right first time. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we're doing. Near record levels of youth unemployment, 3.8% unemployment. We're cutting taxes next month on national insurance, £330 million. We're delivering for families through the difficult times of the cost of living. What about the Labour Party? We heard yesterday what their plan is. Their plan is no plan. The leader of the Labour Party said he's wiping the slate clean. He's starting from scratch. He's only been in the job 2 years. So Tony Blair, who's actually got some experience of winning elections, says there's a gaping hole in Labour's policy offer, and all the while there's a smile creeping over her face. All the while she's revelling in it. We're getting on with serving the people of this country. She's just playing political games.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd revel in the opportunity for the people of this country to have more than just by-elections to see what they think of this government opposite. Call a general election and see where the people are, Mr. Speaker. And this is a man who once said high levels of government taxation was hurting UK competitiveness. Now he's backing the Prime Minister who wants to put taxes up 15 times. At this rate, Mr. Speaker, working people will be paying £500 billion more in tax by 2030. Yeah. How high does he think the burden on working people should get before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We're the ones helping working people with a tax cut of £330, with the support for those on the lowest incomes, with the £650 support for 8 million on the lowest incomes, and with, frankly, the record level of investment coming into this country, from the £1 billion by Moderna for vaccines to the highest level tech investment in Europe, according to Atomico. We are the ones with a plan for low unemployment, a high wage, a high skill economy. At Labour, it's back to year zero.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, he pretends to emphasise with those struggling with the Tory cost of living crisis when it was he himself who once said that food bank users are not in poverty but simply have a cash flow problem. The honourable member doesn't. He spent over £1 million in 9 months on private jets. It shows how out of touch this government is, Mr. Speaker. But at this rate, by 2030, 1 million more people will be using food banks. How many more working people will be pushed into poverty by his Prime Minister before he says enough is enough?
I tell you, if the Labour Party, if the Right Honourable Lady wants to help working people, they should be clear in standing up against these militant, reckless strikes by RMT. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped all over the place when it came to these strikes. First she said they were lose-lose. Then she tweeted workers were left with no choice. When she was asked by the BBC, straight question, she's normally a straight-shooting politician, do you like the RMT? She said, I'm going to have to go now. I've got a train to catch. She talks about working people. talks about working people. She talks about working people. Where was the Right Honourable Lady when the comrades were on the picket line last Thursday? Where was she when the Labour front bench were joining them rather than standing up for the public? She was at the Glyndebourne Music Festival, sipping champagne, listening to opera. Champagne socialism is back in the Labour Party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that says a lot about the party opposite. I'll tell them a few things about militancy. It's this government that are acting in a militant way. And while they should have been at the negotiating table, they were at the banqueting table getting hundreds of thousands squeezed out of their donors instead of dealing with the crisis. And he talks about trains. No one can get trains because of his failed transport minister, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, he has a stronger stomach than his...
I think we'll just have a little quiet. I want to hear the question, and you'll also want to hear the answer. Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's rather ironic that you have to intervene because of the baying mob here when they've got people through their noisy protest laws being stopped after protesting out on the street. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, they don't like it when the public say what they think of them. But I tell you, the honourable gentleman opposite has a stronger stomach than his colleagues behind him.
Honestly, I want to hear the question, I want to hear the answer. And I hate to say it, so do your constituents. Think about them for once instead of yourselves. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when they were asked about the absent Prime Minister's plans to stick around until 2030, one honourable member opposite said he'd lost the plot. Another one said anyone with half a brain would realise how dire things are. And a former Conservative leader said that the country would be better off under new leadership. And now the Prime Minister is at war with his own Defence Secretary after confirming he will break his manifesto pledge and increasing defence spending. Under this government, Britain is set to have less troops, less planes and less ships. The only thing the Prime Minister's interested in is defending his own job. Just how many more troops have to lose their jobs before he finally says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, there's a £24 billion increase for armed forces. Spending on the armed forces is rising to 2.3% of GDP, again making us the largest military spender in Europe. And frankly, we'll take no lessons from the Right Honourable Lady when it comes to security in this country. First thing she did when she became an MP, 2016, voted against Trident, leaving us exposed. And she was campaigning for the Right Honourable Member for Islington North to be Prime Minister, someone who would take us out of NATO.
Mr. Speaker, talking about NATO, where was the honourable member when the situation in Afghanistan on a sun lounger? That's where the honourable member was. I take no lectures from the honourable member when it comes to doing your job. The Prime Minister said he felt no shame over the by-election defeats. He said his government have been quite exceptional. Well, I agree that they've been exceptional, all right. An exceptional record on stagnant wages, rising poverty and broken promises. And the Prime Minister wants to drag this out until 2030s. And how much more can he stomach before he finds the guts, Mr. Speaker? How many more tax rises? How many more families drove into poverty? And how many manifesto pledges broken? I hope for the sake of the British public, Mr. Speaker, that we never find out. And when will the Deputy Prime Minister finally grow a backbone and tell the Prime Minister the game is up?
Mr. Speaker, I can't help thinking that Right Honourable Lady is auditioning for the leadership contest on that side, not really referring to anything on this side. She's got the support of the honourable member. Look, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're putting in place the policies to grow our economy to help...
Mr Murray, we've had a good questions already for Scotland. It's not continued. It's not your debate. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, he was just announcing his support for the Right Honourable Lady in the forthcoming... We're putting in places the economic plan to help people with the cost of living. The Labour leader is getting ready for year zero. We're the ones supporting Ukraine with sanctions on Russia, with military support. The Honourable Lady voted to abolish Trident. We're the ones making the streets safer, more police and tougher sentencing under the Police Crime Sentencing Act in force this week. She voted against both. They got no plan. They're not fit to govern, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Eden Project North has been 5 years of my parliamentary life. We've gone through 3 Prime Ministers, 4 Chancellors, a plethora of ministers, but no, what we've got to the point is that the levelling up bid is going to go in very shortly. We've got a shovel-ready plan. We've got full planning permission. Does my right honourable friend agree with me? It is money worth spending in Morecambe.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, there is no greater and more tenacious campaigner than the honourable member for his constituents. He'll know I can't discuss the details of any specific bids, but the next round of funding allocations will be announced in the autumn, so we won't have to wait too much longer.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party at the sad death of Dame Deborah James. Our thoughts and prayers are with her family at this trying time, and we thank her for all that she has done to raise money for anti-cancer. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's First Minister has set the date and started the campaign. Our nation will have its independence referendum on the 19th of October 2023. The reality is Scotland has already paid the price for not being independent. Westminster governments we did not vote for, imposing policies we don't support, breaking international law, dragging Scotland through a damaging Brexit we didn't vote for, and delivering deep austerity cuts. Contrast that with our European neighbours, who have greater income equality, lower poverty rates and higher productivity. Mr. Speaker, why not Scotland? In the weeks and months ahead, we will make the positive case for independence. Will the opposition, if they can, make the case for continued Westminster rule?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? It's always good to see him in his place. No, genuinely, it's good to see him in his place. It's not the right time for another referendum, given the challenges that we face as one United Kingdom. And I think, and he referred to some of the challenges in Scotland, but I think actually the people of Scotland want their 2 governments to work together, and we are keen, willing, enthusiastic to do so.
Ian Blackford.
There is no case for the union, as we've just heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, because, Mr. Speaker, the harsh reality is that the Tories might fear democratic debate, but they don't have the right to block Scottish democracy. As the late Canon Kenyon Wright said, what if the other voice we all know so well responds by saying, "We say no, we are the state"? His answer, well, we say yes, and we are the people. Just last year, the member for Murray, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives no less, put it in his own words: a vote for the Scottish National Party is another vote for an independence referendum. Well, you won't often hear me say this, but I agree with him, and so do the Scottish people. Scottish democracy will not be a prisoner of any Prime Minister in this place. So why is the UK government scared of democracy? Or is it simply that they have run out of ideas to defend the failing Westminster system?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank the honourable gentleman. I think he's rather airbrushing history with that long soliloquy. But look, he mentioned the problems that Scotland faces. Huge tax burden imposed by the SNP. Scotland's record on science and maths under the international PISA rankings are now have dropped below England and Wales, and the SNP have presided over the worst drug death rate in Europe, the highest since records began. I think the people of Scotland expect their government in Holyrood and in Westminster to work together to tackle the issues facing them in their day-to-day lives. That's what we're doing.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There are great opportunities. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my sincere apologies. There are, Mr. Speaker, great opportunities to create exciting new jobs in low-carbon energy along the East Anglian coast, and East Coast College are up for the challenge of providing local people with the necessary skills. However, they and other colleges are finding it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain teachers in such work as fabrication, engineering and construction. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government come up with a cross-departmental strategy to address this staffing crisis in our further education colleges, which could undermine the levelling up agenda?
Obviously, Deputy's Day. Come on, Deputy.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's why we're investing nearly £52 million to support the sector in recruiting and retaining excellent staff, and in particular looking and focusing on the experience and the skills that we can often find in industry to train the next generation of technical experts.
Neil Hamby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No country that values its independence and indeed its self-respect could agree to a treaty which signed away its economic independence and self-government. Ultimately, membership of any union that involves pooling of sovereignty can only be sustained with the consent of the people. Yes. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with the Prime Minister and his predecessor? Yes or no?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
I just say to the honourable gentleman, that's why we had the referendum in, a few years ago. The people of Scotland have spoken, and we think it's not the right time to be relitigating this issue.
John Burren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking with Lord Ahmed yesterday, I thank the government for now listening and allowing high-risk British Council contractors still in Afghanistan to be processed immediately upon their application to the Citizen Resettlement Scheme and not having to wait a further 2 months until the application window closes. With taxation at a 40-year high, when will the government be bolder in cutting taxes, given all the evidence the world over shows that lower taxes increases prosperity, raises living standards, and better enables the government to help the less fortunate, even if such a policy means cutting spending such as HS2?
My honourable friend makes an important point about driving growth in the economy, and that's why we're cutting taxes with the 130% super deduction for capital investment. That will not just create good jobs, but well-paid jobs and better-paid jobs by boosting productivity. That's why we're increasing the employment allowance, which represents a tax cut of £1,000 for 500,000 small businesses. That's why we've provided business rate relief of £7 billion over the next 5 years. And of course, we're cutting national insurance just next month, worth £330 for a typical employee.
Patricia Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Tory MSP Murdo Fraser points out, Scotland has a third of Britain's landmass, half its territorial waters, over 60% of UK fishing zones, 98% of oil reserves, 63% of natural gas, a quarter of Europe's offshore wind resources and 90% of the UK's fresh water. Can the Deputy Prime Minister explain if his opposition to Scottish independence is because he fears the loss of these invaluable resources?
Deputy Prime Minister.
She's absolutely right in what she just said. There are huge assets right across Scotland, and that's why we think we're stronger together in delivering for the people of Scotland.
Oliver Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will be aware that in North East Hertfordshire we have some of the best farmland in the country. And at a time when there are concerns about food production, food security, at a time when the government is considering rural land use, isn't it time to ensure that our productive farmland isn't covered in solar plants and that they are positioned rather on brownfield sites, on buildings and on low-grade agricultural land?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I think he makes a powerful point, and our 2023 land use framework will set out our priorities for land use across the country, and he's right that we've got to protect the most versatile agricultural land, and any plans for ground-mounted solar installations will have to take that very point into account. His point is well made.
Rosie Duffy.
So far this year, 52 women have been killed in the UK.
Our rights to free speech, safe spaces, fairness in sport, and even the words we use to describe our own bodies are all under threat. Will the Deputy Prime Minister send a clear signal, as some of his Cabinet colleagues have done this week, that Britain respects the rights of women? And will he accept the cross-party amendment to his forthcoming Bill of Rights, which enshrines a woman's right to choose in law?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? Can I also just say at the outset what huge respect I personally have for her with the way she stood up for women's rights and frankly the appalling harassment, trolling and bullying that she's faced. The position, as she knows, is settled in UK law in relation to abortion. It's decided by honourable members across this House. It's an issue of conscience. I don't think there is a strong case for change. What I wouldn't want to do is find ourselves with the greatest respect in the US position where this is being litigated through the courts rather than settled, as it is now settled, by honourable members in this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In February 2019, this House passed my excellent Civil Partnerships, Marriages and Deaths Registration, etc. Act, mandating government to extend civil partnerships to opposite-sex couples, enabling marriage records to include mothers' details, and requiring the Justice Secretary to produce a report empowering coroners to investigate stillbirths. The first two have come into force very successfully, but 2.5 years on, despite further shocking revelations about deaths of babies at several hospitals, no report has yet been published, nor regulations to give coroners the powers they need. Why not?
Can I thank my honourable friend? He's absolutely right to raise this, and of course stillbirth is an appalling tragedy which has the most devastating impact on families across the country. He's right, the MOJ, the DHSC have jointly consulted on proposals to provide coroners with new powers in this regard. I have looked at this personally. We will be publishing the government's response to the consultation very shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Threatened, terrified, alone. This was how survivors of sexual violence told me they felt when they were pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements and gagging clauses by their universities. No victim of sexual assault or harassment should ever be coerced into silence by the very institutions who are meant to protect them. Not at university, not at work, not anywhere. So will the government back my bill to ban the use of NDAs in cases of sexual harassment, bullying and misconduct? And will the Deputy Prime Minister consider meeting with me in his role as Justice Secretary to discuss how we'll put a stop to this deplorable practice once and for all?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I just say to the Honourable Lady, I'll look very carefully at any particular proposals she has. We've got to do everything we can to protect women and girls in this country, and also, frankly, to make them feel more confident in the justice system. That's why I'm relieved, but restless to go further, but relieved that the volume of rape convictions in the last year alone is up by 2/3. And of course, in the Police Courts Sentencing and Crime Act in force this week, we have taken extra measures, for example, by extending the time limit for reporting domestic abuse and also criminalising taking photos of a mother breastfeeding without consent. And I'll certainly look at the proposals that she's raised with me.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are investing nearly £190 billion this year into the NHS, and yet many of us see disturbing deficiencies within NHS management, no more so than in the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust. 4 years ago, in 2018, my right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow, and I secured £312 million for a major A&E modernisation within our local hospital trust. 4 years on, construction has still not started. What message can the Deputy Prime Minister give to the people of Shrewsbury as to how government can intervene to break this gridlock and finally allow the £312 million we have secured to be utilised for the benefits of the people of Shropshire and Mid Wales?
Well, my honourable friend is a doughty champion of his constituents, particularly on NHS services. The DHSC recently received the strategic outline case for the transformation of A&E services in Shrewsbury and Telford. It's still being processed, but I can tell him that the Trust is aiming to present the full business case in 2023, with construction starting in the same year.
Liz Saville Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd hyd yn oed.
When he announced his Bill of Rights last week, the Deputy Prime Minister said it will strengthen our UK tradition of freedom. Freedom, shameless, from a government whose contempt for the rule of law and devolution can be judged in equal measure. They're scrapping Welsh law against our will, denying Scotland the right to choose their own future. That isn't freedom. Will he prove me wrong? Will he prove me wrong by enshrining self-determination in his Bill of Rights?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? I thought it was very deft the way she got that in. I think we've all heard, actually, across the benches today, the case for reinforcing free speech, whether it's the judge-made privacy laws or some of the way people are shouted down when they express legitimate opinions. And I also think that the people of Wales will want to join with us, as true across the country, making sure we can deport more foreign national offenders. That is the reality for the people in Wales and across the United Kingdom, and I think the Bill of Rights will be strengthening our tradition of freedom, but also curbing those abuses and making sure we inject a bit more common sense into the system.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Derriford Hospital in my constituency is part of the new hospital build programme announced by this government, and work on the new emergency department actually starts this year, which is a significant investment for the amazing staff there and the brilliant Chief Executive, Anne James, who works so hard. But given the incredible pressures on the real estate in Derriford, would my honourable friend consider prioritising capital investment into that part of the UK to ensure that we can accelerate these plans, particularly in digital, so that people in Plymouth get the world-class healthcare they deserve?
Can I thank our honourable friend? Look, he's absolutely right. This is the largest hospital building programme in a generation, and his constituents are going to benefit very directly. I can tell him that there will be a new integrated emergency care hospital scheme for University Hospitals, Plymouth NHS Trust at the Derriford Emergency Care Hospital. And yes, on tech, he's absolutely right. The facilities will be at the cutting edge of modern technology, and that will really help drive up the quality of patient care.
Bill Furness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The victims of black cab rapist John Warboys were only able to challenge the police's failure to investigate his appalling crimes because of the Human Rights Act. They would not have been able to do so under the Deputy Prime Minister's new so-called Bill of Rights. Why does he want to stop women like the victims of John Warboys from making sure that police protect them from rape and sexual assault and getting the justice they deserve?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for the opportunity? It was not the result of litigation that addressed the problems with the Warboy case. And indeed, if she wants to look after victims in cases like that and others, the Labour Party should join with us, not just in supporting the Bill of Rights, but our parole reforms that will make sure dangerous offenders are not released and we protect the public.
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituent Joel Lindop has suffered the abduction of his young children to Poland, one of many families in the UK who go through a similar experience every year. And despite repeated judgments in his favour in the courts in Poland, he's been unable to persuade the Polish authorities to fulfil their obligations under international law and return those children to their family. Will my right honourable friend intercede and ensure that my constituent and the many other families who face this challenge are able to ensure that their children are returned safely and in a timely fashion in the future?
Can I thank honourable friend? Look, I can't imagine how appalling that situation must be for any parent to find themselves in. He'll know we're committed to the 1980 Hague Convention on Child Abduction, and that does provide a mechanism. He's right that that's one that has to be driven through the courts, and that's not something we can directly interfere on, but I will make sure, and I'll speak to the Foreign Office and see if the Minister can address whether there's anything further that we can properly do to support him.
Brendan Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A serious question on the conduct of the government as regards free trade agreements. And I cannot understate the fury of the International Trade Committee this morning that led us to unanimously empty chair the Secretary of State for International Trade. The government has broken its word to the committee, to the House and to you, Mr. Speaker, on scrutiny of the Australian trade deal by triggering CRAG and now endangering a committee report. It is the unanimous view of the committee, Mr. Speaker, Tory, Labour, SNP and DUP, that CRAG should be delayed to allow proper scrutiny, as was promised. Will the government deliver on its promise and therefore delay Crag.
I understand.
Deputy Prime Minister.
I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the Secretary of State for International Trade has agreed to come back and address the committee just as soon as possible.
Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, I was privileged last week to attend the Malaria Summit in Kigali. Even today, malaria remains the biggest single killer of mankind ever, and 1.7 billion people are living every day under its shadow of misery. But, Mr. Speaker, we're on the cusp of something really special, in that recent advances, education and our British world-leading vaccines can now eradicate it forever. Can my right honourable friends please confirm that the UK will fulfil its full commitment to the Global Fund?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend? And I know from working at the Foreign Office just how powerful the Global Fund is. It's a very high-performing international organisation. He will know that since 2002 we've been the third largest donor, so we've stepped up to the plate. The UK hasn't yet determined our pledge for the 7th replenishment, but I know the Foreign Secretary will have heard loud and clear the advocacy that he's made in their regard.
Final question, Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In their efforts to pursue a hostile environment, the Home Office routinely tears families apart and breaks human rights and equalities legislation. They're reported to be sending up yet another charter deportation flight to Nigeria and Ghana. In Pride Month, they'll be deporting LGBT asylum seekers, fleeing homophobia, and grandmothers and mothers of British children who have lived in this country for over 25 years. Given that the Home Office repeatedly get it wrong and end up having to take people off these flights, can the Deputy Prime Minister tell me how many people have been removed from this flight already, and when will they stop these inhumane deportation charter flights?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady. Look, she's right at least in one respect. Of course, people who come here need to be treated decently and humanely. We're absolutely committed to that. We also need to make sure that we cut down the illegal routes, and those that are here who've committed serious offences can be returned home. And the crucial thing, and I'm working with the Home Secretary, is to make sure we do both of those things. But what we can't allow is illegal routes to flourish into this country, otherwise we'll just attract more. And we cannot allow people who commit serious offences in this country to stay and continue to pose a threat to the public.
Ends questions.
I very much enjoyed that. There was lots of energy there, wasn't there, while still in the studio with me? Conservative MP Alex Shelbrooke and Labour's Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves. Right, the best line from your respective leaders. They both did well, I thought. What was Angela's best line?
Well, I thought Angela was absolutely on fire today. She did a brilliant job, fantastic, lots of great lines in there. But actually, I liked something she said right towards the beginning, and she talked about the fact that last week, the government lost 2 by-elections on the same day, something that hasn't happened for 30 years, and said, no wonder the Prime Minister wasn't there in the chamber today after that. He's running scared.
I mean, as I said before we started, I love the good knockabout stuff, and it was proper knockabout, wasn't it? I think they were both enjoying it. I thought actually it was a bit of a weak one to start with because of the reasons he's away, but I thought the bit when they're talking about who's going to replace him, and they had that knockabout either side when she said about, your party wants to get rid of him, and he said, but you want to get rid of your leader. I think it's that good knockabout stuff. There were some serious points in there, of course there were, but I think it's what we're talking about. I think you just used the word, Gloria, energy, and that's, I think it's good fun, really.
Angela Rayner used the opportunity to call for a general election. Now, the Prime Minister, I don't think this is controversial to say, he's had a bit of difficulty with his own benches, quite a lot of difficulty, and they're still speaking out, some of them. It might be the way that he can save his premiership. He can renew his mandate and go to the people. Angela Rayner, Labour might get their way, might they?
Well, I think there's every possibility you could go to a general election this autumn. I mean, if you look at, if you take that in its bluntest form about all of the incoming fire the Prime Minister's getting from one way or another, and you look at exactly what I was saying right at the beginning about that situation with Ukraine and the war and all the pressures that's bringing, then maybe you do say, look, we have got such a trial coming towards us, let's just put an end to all this stuff about Beergate, about Partygate, about all those things, draw the line, because we've got to do it. So I'm not going to say that that's not going to happen, because I think, you join the dots, there's a possibility it could happen.
Yeah. Unless, of course, Tory MPs sort of get back into line and crack on and, get behind him and crack on with the job. But there's not that much sign of that. Am I being too pessimistic?
I think, Gloria, you would say Tory MPs are revolting, but I don't know.
I'm not sure Labour's ready for a general election because as Sir John Curtis actually said, the result in Wakefield, it's no doubt about it, that was a welcome win back. But he said the swing that Wakefield had is unlikely to be replicated at a general election. So it's not in the bag, and you have a mountain to climb to get a majority Labour government, don't you? So, it could be really difficult for you right now.
Well, I'm with Angela on this. Bring it on. This is a government that's out of ideas. The windfall tax, for example, their big policy announcement, well, that was a Labour policy that the government adopted. I think people have lost trust in this government. Conservative MPs have lost trust with the Prime Minister, and we are ready to form a government. Whenever that general election may come, we'll be ready to fight it.
I think there's one phrase in politics, though, be careful what you wish for.
Was it a good idea? Because Keir Starmer made a speech yesterday saying, and Dominic Raab referred to it, he said he disowned that 2019 Labour manifesto, the one which was fought with Jeremy Corbyn as leader. He is now starting afresh with a blank slate. As Dominic Raab said, 2 years. 2 years he's been leader. Shouldn't he have got a bit further than a blank slate? Is it right to disown that entire manifesto?
Well, I think that there's nothing new here. As any political party goes into an election, they set out their policy platform that they stand on. And we said some time ago that Annalisa Dodds was reviewing our policy and consulting far and wide. And the reality is that we have put forward a whole raft of policies, whether it's the windfall tax or ending non-dom status, reforming business rates, the work I lead on for Labour on ending violence against women and girls, and our green paper for that. We've got those policies in place, and it is right that as you go into a general election, you look at what works. We're in a different place. We've had a global pandemic. There's a war going on in Europe. So it is absolutely right that we would be setting out ahead of a general election what our policy offer would be.
Dominic Raab also took the opportunity to have a dig at Labour over the rail strikes, over the fact that some Labour MPs stood with those. I'm sure they all stood in solidarity, but some of them literally stood on the picket lines. Do you think that the Conservatives at your party are in the right place on this? Do you think they might enjoy considerable public support for saying, look, we need a pay rise, prices are too high?
Well, I think if you do quick polling, people will say, yeah, give people a pay rise until their tax has to go up to pay for it. 1.25% on national insurance, put $12.5 billion into the NHS. You now want to add on 15% pay demand for nurses or 30% pay demand for GPs, etc. That money's coming from somewhere, probably your taxes. I think the problem is right now is that, and this goes right back to us at the beginning of the show, Gloria, is that the government isn't making it the case as obvious as it should about what the consequences of this war are. And as you say, on the back of the pandemic, as Ellie talks about, we've had the pandemic, we've now got a war. All of these things are huge worldwide inflationary pressures. And this doesn't take you back to where you were, say, in the 70s or whatever, where there were a lot of problems with your own economy, which you had to sort out to bring down inflation because you relatively sat alone in high inflation. This inflation rate is now happening world over, and it's growing, and we don't look to see where perhaps those things can end. So where you then create the problem for your own economy is if you chase inflation for the 4 million workers in the public sector, but not for the 28 million workers in the private sector. And very quickly they get pushed out of living costs and being able to do things just to sort of fund those. So I think it's in the wrong place. But what I do think is that the government should tread very carefully about how it approaches these strikes. And I have to say, Gloria, I spoke to my whip on Monday. I said, don't even go there about agency workers.
This is the suggestion that the government are going to introduce new laws to enable agency workers to replace striking workers, something that I think that ban was introduced during Margaret Thatcher's days, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, it came in the 70s. Margaret Thatcher never wanted to reverse that because it is a fundamental right. And I think the problem is this. If you want to go down the path of saying we'll bring in agency workers to replace public sector workers, number one, who are they? I mean, there's thousands. Ellie would agree with me just how many spaces there are for nurses. Where are these agency workers who'd replace them? Same with teachers, train drivers, 12 months, doesn't work. But what you're actually doing, because that won't solve that public sector problem, what you're actually doing is you're taking away the rights of the 28 million people who work in the private sector. Too often the focus is on public sector workers. Think about the people who, unscrupulous bosses, and the hell of a lot out of there, would say, right, you lot, you're now all on minimum wage from your £20 an hour because I've got to cut my costs. And they say, well, we'll withdraw our labour. Says, fine, off you go. I'll bring in agency workers. That's why they're ill thought out, these policies. That's why I've made it clear to my whip, I ain't voting for that. Margaret Thatcher never brought that in with all of the strike reform she brought in, and it might be seen as a solution to try and solve what's going on in the public sector, but it'll bloody well destroy the private sector.
Well, I reckon backbenchers like you have probably got quite a lot of power right now, so that we may never see those proposals come to light.
Hope not.
How damaging is it when Dominic Raab refers to Labour being on the side of what he described as militant trade unions? Of course, Keir Starmer asked his frontbenchers not to appear on picket lines. Some, a minority, admittedly just a few, they defied him. They won't be disciplined. A slap on the wrist is what is being briefed.
But this is a government that is doing everything they can to try and blame the strikes on Labour, which is absurd. They are the government. It's for the government to take responsibility. No one wants to see workers take industrial actions. Workers don't take industrial action rightly. But it is right that people are fairly paid for the job that they do. And what we should have seen is the government getting round the negotiating table with the trade unions, with the rail companies, and negotiating a settlement. And we haven't seen any of that. All we've seen is a government trying to pass the buck and then say, well, we'll introduce anti-strike laws. But even their own backbenchers.
But it is a bit difficult, Ellie. It is a bit difficult when Mick Lynch says, I would never negotiate with a Tory. And it is also a bit difficult that the government don't have the direct involvement in the railways for the ones we're really talking about. But I think you quickly will get public sympathy running out when it has that direct impact on their lives. And I came back to what I said in the chamber when we had that debate about the rail strikes. It struck me during the pandemic how many constituents I've got who have small businesses totally reliant on the footfall through Leeds City Station and Leeds. And as people will move to, the impact did the rail strikes have, not as great as before because people work from home, but that impact on those small businesses who rely on people going into, this is where it all starts to break down. And public support for strikes is very important, otherwise it quickly runs down. And it's why I always say you've got to separate private and public, because those public sector workers will still have a job to go back to, they'll still have the pay they had, they'll still have the holiday, they'll probably still get the incremental pay rise and some pay rise. That's nothing that you get in the private sector. Go on strike in the private sector, the business might fold.
I'm going to give you both a breath because I am going to bring in our political reporter. We didn't plan our outfits very well, as you can see this morning. Catherine Foster, what did you make of today's session?
Goodness, well, it was very energetic, wasn't it? And what struck me most was the enjoyment of it. Obviously, they're not doing it every day. It's just an occasional thing for Dominic Raab and Angela Rayner. But Prime Ministers traditionally dread PMQs. Even Tony Blair, after he left office, and he was a great orator, admitted that I know it was the worst point in the week. But it was incredibly entertaining. Angela Rayner, shortly before she started, tweeted, I know Dominic Raab's got a black belt in karate, but I've got my Kung Fu Panda shoes on and I'm ready. She had heels with Kung Fu Panda on the back. And she was really on fire. They both seemed to enjoy it hugely. When Angela Rayner made the joke at the beginning about the by-election results and said even the PMs fled the country, it wasn't just the Labour benches that were laughing. It were lots of Conservative MPs laughing too. And Dominic Raab also seemed to enjoy it. He actually winked, I think, at one point at Angela Rayner from across the dispatch box. But it was uncomfortable, wasn't it, when Angela Rayner went on the Tory tax rises? Because It would normally be the other way around. It would normally be Conservatives attacking a Labour government on tax rises, but the tax burden is now at a 70-year high, and I think that was definitely uncomfortable for them. I think where it was hardest for Dominic Raab, for Labour, was Dominic Raab on defence. He was saying Europe we spend the most, and we've got a really proud record here. Angela Rayner was saying, well, when Afghanistan was falling, you were on a sun lounger, weren't you, in Crete? And of course, he famously was on holiday when Afghanistan fell, although he had been very keen at the time to stress that the sea was closed. But of course, he came back and he said, well, I'm going to take no lessons from you on defence because you campaigned to put Jeremy Corbyn in power. So it was really quite a memorable session today, I thought, and also a couple of moments of unity, obviously paying tribute to Deborah James, who sadly passed away last night at the age of just 40. And also I thought it was nice to see Dominic Raab pay tribute to Labour MP Rosie Duffield, who asked a question about abortion laws changing in the States. And he paid tribute to her, saying, you know, he stood by of abuse over the last weeks and months, and indeed a couple of years, on her position on standing up for women's rights.
Catherine Forster, our political reporter, thank you very much for that excellent summary. Actually, we haven't talked about defence yet, and that was something, it seems like quite a row is brewing within government. So the Prime Minister is resisting the manifesto promise that he made to increase defence spending faster than inflation, but it seems like the Defence Secretary and the Foreign Secretary are briefing quite heavily that they want more cash. How's this going to pan out, Alec?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you're hearing a few different things. I don't think we'll be honestly able to answer those questions till after the Madrid summit. I think that I'm getting the impression that some things are not being said for the Prime Minister to say. They've got, obviously, the summit going on. There is that settlement up to 2025 anyway of the 24 billion, which was a huge settlement in real terms. But it is a concern. I mean, it is a concern that defence has always been seen as the easy pair of scissors to take to it. And we have to get our head round that the world has fundamentally changed. And the phrase, the post-Cold War peace dividend, it's gone.
OK, final about 30, 40 seconds, because Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has been speaking on defence. We're going to play that in a second. I mean, where would Labour get any money from to pay more to our armed forces, to increase the budget?
Well, look, we've been calling for a new defence settlement. Frankly, it's extraordinary that we haven't seen it, given what's happening in Europe at the moment. And we, you know, after 9/11, we did invest decades in the armed forces, an extra 3.5 billion a year. So we would like the government to come back and take this seriously.
Well, I would like you both to come back soon, because you have been fantastic company. The Conservatives, Alex Shelbrooke, and Labour's Ellie Reeve, thank you. Well, the Prime Minister today is in Madrid meeting world leaders at the NATO summit. His Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has called on the government to increase defence spending, as we were just chatting about there, in the face of the threat from Russia. The leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, has been speaking to broadcasters this morning and called on the government to review its military spending.
I think the first thing to say is that the Tory government has been cutting defence for 10 years now. And despite what they said in 2019 at election time, they're planning to cut 10,000 more from our armed forces. Now, we, the Labour Party, have always put the defence of our nation first and called on them to halt that further cut. What I want to see now is a reboot in light of what's happened in the Ukraine. I want to see the government come forward with a review, and that has to include spending, because they've obviously got it wrong over a number of years now, and I think they're beginning to recognise that.
Now, turning to domestic matters, on defection rumours that have been bubbling up over the last few days, should the Labour Party be accepting Tories, people who are opposed to your party, ideologically, presumably. Is this just a cheap political stunt?
Well, look, there are lots of stories swirling around in Westminster, and there always will be those sort of stories. But after the result in Wakefield last week, it was a very good result for the Labour Party, with Labour supporters, Labour voters coming back to the Labour Party, an important swing to us, which shows that many Conservative seats now are vulnerable. I'm not surprised there's this discussion going on in Westminster, because many Tory MPs will be looking and saying that result for Labour was very good. I'm not sure I'm going to hold my seat anymore. I think it's a reflection of the political change that's happened in the last few weeks with the local elections and with the Wakefield by-election. And if I was a Tory MP, I'd be pretty jittery about the direction of travel, because the Tories party is on the way down and the Labour Party is on the way up.
Now, looking at the strikes of last week, you issued an edict to your shadow ministers, to your front benchers, to not attend picket lines. Now, a number of them did. Why haven't you sacked the ones who defied your orders to stay off those picket lines?
Well, when it comes to strikes, I think it's very important to understand the frustration that the public have. And I've been talking to residents here in Crawley. They're frustrated at the government because only last autumn, the Prime Minister was saying to them, we're going to have a high-wage economy, but he's presided over stagnation of our economy that's gone on for a decade now, by the way. But the combination now of high inflation, high tax imposed by this government, and low wages and low growth has put people in a really difficult situation. So they're fed up, they're frustrated with the government, they feel stuck in the situation that the government has put them in. I want all these issues resolved. I don't want strikes to go ahead. I want people around the table. But I think the frustration is that the government hasn't lifted a finger to try and sort the situation out, and I wouldn't underestimate that frustration in relation to that. And the Labour Party takes the view that a responsible government does resolve these issues. In Wales, where we've got a Welsh Labour government, the party's got round the table and we don't have rail strikes. That's the difference between what Labour would do and what this government is doing.
But on that specific question, why haven't you sacked those shadow ministers who disobeyed your direct orders?
Well, I was very clear that a responsible government gets the negotiating parties around the table, and that's why I took the approach that I did. The Chief Whip has now dealt with those that didn't follow the advice, and that's a perfectly satisfactory outcome.
Leader of the Labour Party speaking this morning. You've been watching Deputy Prime Minister's Question Time live with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every Monday to Thursday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money, of course, with Liam Halligan. But for now, it is time for your weather. Thank you for your company.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. A bright day for some with sunshine, but quite a few showers, I think, for many. And there'll be some heavy downpours out there as well. And one or two spots seeing more persistent rain. A couple of occluded fronts moving around an area of low pressure will provide the focus for showers. That low sitting to the northwest of the UK, and still a breezy day to come. Not as breezy as it was on Tuesday, but we're going to see some cloud and some outbreaks of rain for a time, clearing East Anglia in the south.